History remembers the gunshot that killed Alexander Hamilton, but it often forgets the deafening silence that followed for his wife, Eliza. For most historical figures, death is the end of the story. For Eliza Hamilton, it was the beginning of her life's true work. Her war did not begin on a battlefield, but in a quiet room on July 12, 1804, as she held the hand of her dying husband, the architect of the American financial system, now a man ruined by a duel. The world saw a founding father fall. Eliza saw the collapse of her entire world for the second time. She was 47 years old, a widow with 7 children, the youngest of whom was only 2, and she was utterly, hopelessly in debt. Alexander Hamilton, the genius who had created a national treasury out of nothing, had died with almost nothing to his name. The grand home they had built, the Grange, was on the verge of foreclosure. Creditors were circling. The pension he was owed for his service in the Revolutionary War was denied. While the nation mourned him with grand eulogies, Eliza was left to face the brutal, private reality. The man who had secured the nation's future had left his own family's future in peril. This was not the first time she had faced public ruin because of him. 7 years earlier, she had endured the Reynolds pamphlet, her husband's public confession of an affair, a document published to save his political career at the expense of her private dignity. The historical record notes her reaction with a single potent act. She burned his letters. History often interprets this as an act of rage, a wife's fury. But what if it was something else? What if it was her first act as the curator of his legacy? Her first attempt to control a narrative that had spiraled out of her grasp? In that fire, she may have been destroying not just evidence of his love, but evidence of his flaws, protecting the man she believed in from the man he sometimes was. Now, with him gone, that mission became her entire reason for being. She was surrounded by his enemies. The sitting president, Thomas Jefferson, and his allies had spent years systematically dismantling Hamilton's reputation, painting him as a monarchist, an elitist, a danger to the republic. They controlled the narrative. They were writing the first drafts of American history, and in their version, Alexander Hamilton was a villain, a brilliant but misguided footnote. Eliza, a woman with no political power, no public voice, and no money, saw this and made a decision. They could have his life, but they would not have his story. She would fight them, not with speeches or pamphlets, but with paper and ink. Her first battle was for survival. She sold off property, relied on the charity of friends and family, and fought to keep a roof over her children's heads. She lived a life of stark frugality, a world away from the society dinners and political influence she had once known. But in the quiet hours of the night, in a small room cluttered with his husband's belongings, her real work began. She found his old army paybooks, his speeches, his forgotten drafts of the Federalist Papers. She began to collect every scrap of paper he had ever touched. She wrote to his former colleagues, his friends, even his political acquaintances, begging for any letters he had written. Each piece of paper was a brick. She was building a fortress, a paper fortress, around his memory. This was not just the work of a grieving widow. This was the work of a silent general, gathering her forces for a war that would last for the next half-century. As the years turned into decades, America moved on. The Jeffersonian era gave way to the age of Jackson. New heroes and new controversies captured the public imagination. Alexander Hamilton, for many, faded into the caricature his enemies had created. The official histories being written during this period often reflected this bias. They celebrated Jefferson's vision of an agrarian republic and downplayed Hamilton's crucial role in creating a stable, industrial nation. The records show the political victories of presidents, the laws passed, the territories acquired, but they do not show the quiet, relentless war being waged by a woman in her 60s, then her 70s, from a small house in New York. Eliza's life became a singular, obsessive mission, to prove them all wrong. She organized the thousands of documents she had collected into a coherent archive. This was a monumental task in an era before libraries and professional archivists. She sorted through dense economic treatises, military orders, and passionate political arguments, her hands covered in the ink of her husband's thoughts. She was not merely collecting them, she was understanding them. She was internalizing his vision for America, a vision of a strong central government, a robust economy, and a nation that could stand proudly on the world stage. She believed that if the world could only see the sheer volume, the intellectual power, the patriotic fire in these papers, they would have to see the man she knew. Her fight was deeply personal. When James Monroe, a man who had been complicit in exposing the Reynolds affair decades earlier, visited her as president, she refused to let him off the hook. She led him to her husband's bust and, according to witnesses, confronted him directly, demanding an apology for the damage he had done to Hamilton's name. This wasn't just an old grudge. It was Eliza, the keeper of the flame, reminding a sitting president that history has a long memory and that she was its living embodiment. She was forcing the men who had outlived her husband to look his legacy in the eye. But her work extended beyond just his memory. In her own grief and hardship, she saw the plight of others. She had become a widow with children and no support system. So she helped found the first private orphanage in New York City, the Orphan Asylum Society. This was not a side project. It was the other half of her life's work. While she fought to secure the legacy of one man, she also fought to secure the future of hundreds of forgotten children. In a way, she was doing for them what she was doing for Alexander, giving them a story, a future, and a place in a world that had discarded them. It was a profound act of empathy, born from her own suffering. For over 27 years, she ran the orphanage, a testament to her own strength and character, independent of her famous husband. Yet even this work was connected to her central mission. She was living the values of public service and care for the vulnerable that she believed were at the core of Hamilton's vision. She was not just defending his words, she was living them. All the while, the papers waited. They were her army, silent and patient, waiting for the right commander to lead them into the battle for history. Time became Eliza's greatest ally. She outlived them all. Jefferson, Adams, Madison, Monroe, all the giants of the founding generation passed into history, leaving Eliza as one of the last living links to the birth of the nation. She became a relic, a revered figure from a bygone era. People would visit her, eager to hear stories of Washington, of the Revolution, of the man she had loved. And she would tell them. She was a meticulous, powerful oral historian, shaping perceptions one conversation at a time. But conversations were fleeting. She needed something permanent. She needed a book. For decades, she had searched for a biographer worthy of the task, someone who could take her vast archive and forge it into an undeniable testament to Alexander's genius. Many were approached, but the task was too daunting, the political climate too hostile. Finally, in her old age, she found her author, her own son, John Church Hamilton. For years, she worked alongside him. She was now in her 80s, her eyesight failing, but her mind was as sharp as ever. She would sit with her son, recounting events, explaining complex financial policies, and pointing to the exact letter or document that would prove her point. She was the project manager, the lead researcher, and the chief editor of her husband's life story. The result, a massive, multi-volume biography, was finally published. It was not a literary masterpiece, but it was something far more important. It was a monument. It was the paper fortress she had spent her life building, now open for the world to see. It laid out in overwhelming detail the sheer scale of his contributions, forcing a new generation of historians to reevaluate his place in the American pantheon. She had won. The war was over. But a quiet, lingering question remains, a question born from that first act of defiance when she burned his letters. In her 50-year quest to build his legacy, did she preserve history or did she create it? By selecting which documents to share, by emphasizing his strengths, and by outliving all who could contradict her narrative. Did she present the real Alexander Hamilton, or did she present her version of him? The version she needed him to be, the version she needed America to see. The fire that consumed their letters left a permanent void, a space of unknowing. We have the Hamilton she gave us, the statesman, the genius, the hero. But what of the husband, the man whose personal flaws caused her so much pain? Those parts of him may have turned to ash, scrubbed from the record by his most loyal and powerful defender. Her love was her motivation, but love can be a powerful editor. Eliza Hamilton died in 1854 at the age of 97. She died in a room in her daughter's home, surrounded by the papers that had been her life's companions. She had not just lived through history, she had wrestled with it, and in many ways she had shaped it. Her story is not just an epilogue to his, it is a silent epic of its own. A testament to the idea that sometimes the most important battles are not fought with swords, but with memory, and the most powerful legacy is the one built, piece by piece, in the quiet aftermath of a storm. History is full of silent figures who shape our world in ways we're only now beginning to understand. What do you believe was Eliza's true motivation? Pure devotion, or the strategic mind of history's greatest editor? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe the most important stories are often hidden in plain sight, consider subscribing to join us as we explore them.